You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
The U.S. Dakota War had a profound impact on the Dakota people, as many were forced from their homes following the war. Associate Professor Darlene St. Clair talks with Access Minnesota about the importance of remembering the events of 1862. She begins the interview with an introduction in the Dakota language.
Mitakuyapi, ampetuki de chante washte na pe chiu zampie. Ie kiapiwe de mieye washichu ia Darlene St. Clair e makiapie. Damakota chanshai pihe mataha, wana chekpa untue ed wati. Minnesota won't be wakantuya ed chtawani. So I said, hello my relatives. Today I greet you with a good heart and a handshake. I am Ie Kiapiwi. My Washichu name is Darlene St. Clair. I am from a place called Chanshaipi, which means they paint the trees red, which is the Lower Sioux Indian community. I am Dakota, and right now I live in the Twin Cities, and I work at the University of Minnesota.
Who were the Dakota people, and what was their relationship with the settlers in Minnesota prior to the war?
Dakota people have been in this place that we now call Minnesota for probably 10 to 12,000 years. Dakota have been here since the beginning of our existence as people. That's a very different kind of connection to the land than settlers who came at most, a couple hundred years ago. But we started in the 1700s, certainly seeing explorers, European explorers coming in and fur trade. The fur trade was a hunger for furs in Europe sort of fed this trade in Minnesota. And so in those early years, Dakota people had relationships with fur traders and then later just traders who were trading European goods that were really based on a Dakota value system. So even today for Dakota people, being a good Dakota person is being a good relative. And so that is sort of the foundation of our sort of society, is relationships, is creating relationships and then living into those relationships. So being a good relative is sort of the key kind of structure. We might, in more anthropological terms, talk about kinship as being sort of the foundation of Dakota society. So Dakota people did and continue to sort of always look for building relationships. So Dakota people built relationships with those early fur traders. Those men got oftentimes brought into the community through marriage. And so we see Dakota people making efforts to sort of pull these people into Dakota society. Now, for a long time, that those things worked out well enough, I would say. I mean, they worked out peaceably. The problem was that the hunger for furs in Europe went beyond what Mother Nature could provide. And so the pressures on Dakota people to continue to hunt and overhunt were tremendous. And sometimes these relationships that have been brought into the community, these traders, put a lot of strain on Dakota people and pressure on Dakota people to continue to harvest and to take what really we didn't have.
Was there much empathy for the plight of the Dakota amongst the white settlers?
In the 1800s?
Yes, prior to the war.
I would say generally no. Even though many Dakota people had good relations with their non-Dakota neighbors, I would say, there's this big transitional shift of economies in Minnesota. So we have a traditional Dakota economy prior to whites coming here. Then we see a transition into a fur trade economy where Dakota people are necessary in this fur trade economy. So Dakota people had a say and a place and a role and were therefore treated respectfully. Then we start seeing a shift towards what the economy in Minnesota is built around is getting access to the annuities through the treaties. So much of the Minnesota economy was based on we need Indian people who are signing treaties, and through those treaties they're going to get annuities, and that's how we're going to live. So really getting access to Indian annuities was part of Minnesota economy. And then eventually that shifted to really it was about Indian lands, Dakota lands. So once the economy of Minnesota is built around land and land speculation, then Dakota people are not part of the story anymore. They're not needed. In fact, they're an impediment to progress. So we see over this long period of time a transition in the relationships between Dakota and non-Dakota people, and also in how Dakota people are treated, getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
As we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the U.S.-Dakota War this month, there will be numerous commemorative events. Obviously, the exhibit over at the History Center, there will be a gathering of some of the ancestors of the white settlers who were in the war. That'll be taking place near Birch Coulee. What would you like to see people take away from those commemorations? There's strong emotions on both sides. What would you like to see people take away?
Dakota people have been commemorating this for a number of years, and there are some projects that people have been working on. So there's a horse ride. There is a march from Lower Sioux to Fort Snelling. There's a run. I mean, there's a number of these kinds of commemorations, and I actually think that these things are good things and are healing things. So I encourage everyone who's to sort of take part in these activities. I think the thing that I would like to take away from it is a new understanding of Dakota people's roles in the history of Minnesota. I think we have a tendency to sort of think that, I think one of the reasons why I sort of have a tendency to not want to invest a lot of time and energy into the actual war is because Dakota people have been defined by this war for 150 years as if nothing happened before and nothing happened after. And that's sort of what I really want to critique, is that Dakota people have an experience in Minnesota that is thousands of years length of time. I want Dakota concerns and Dakota issues and Dakota history and culture to be considered beyond the scope of a few weeks in 1 year. Inasmuch as both whites and Dakota people died in the war, the long-term impact on Dakota people is enormous. Most Dakota people are continue to be in exile from the state. Most Dakota people continue to suffer from, what we call historical grief and trauma, kind of a version of PTSD. Those kinds of things continue to sort of are part of our experience as Dakota people in 2012. What I wouldn't want is that in another 50 or 100 or 150 years that we're really still sort of dissecting the war itself without having a broader understanding of the impact and the context.
We know that following the war, the number of Dakota people living in Minnesota diminished dramatically. Mm-hmm. What is the relationship today with the Dakota people and their fellow Minnesotans? How would you characterize that?
I mean, of course, I think that things have improved, but I would still say that many Dakota people live kind of under the radar in a way. I think if you were to ask a typical Minnesotan which tribe lives in Minnesota, I think that the typical answer would be Ojibwe or Chippewa people are the tribe that's from Minnesota. That's problematic in that, Dakota people have been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Ojibwe people migrated here through a prophecy and came somewhere between 400, 700 years, something like that. So the fact that Dakota people are still not recognized and still not seen as the real indigenous tribe in this place, certainly in this place where the University of Minnesota is a difficult thing, and it's not accidental. I mean, certainly our educational systems have not done what is necessary to sort of really let Minnesotans know about the true history of Minnesota. I teach a class on Dakota culture and history, and I've taught American Indian Studies for a number of years. And every semester, my students tell me, why is this the first I'm hearing this? Why have I never heard of this before? And these are non-native students who are tremendously frustrated with the fact that the history of Minnesota has not been properly shared with the citizens of the state.
Professor Darlene St. Clair, thanks so much for joining us on Access Minnesota. That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. Please join us again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.